I have the absolute pleasure of inviting to the stage the last, definitely not least, and maybe most dramatic of all of the panels of today. I really love the title of this, The Rise of AI in Mental Health, Risks and Opportunities. So I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Peter Baldwin, who will chair this session. Peter Baldwin is an academic clinical psychologist with a background in digital clinical trials. His research focuses on using technology to deliver care to underserviced populations, most recently co-leading 10, which is a national digital mental health service for health professionals with Dr. Melissa Black. He is currently the head of research policy research, which means that we're conjoined by the hip currently to his pain and my pleasure, which aims to support evidence-based policy and practice in Australian mental health. Also joining Peter is Dr. Kit Huckville, if you can join the stage. So he's the director of Digital Health Validatron, which is a very cool name, which is a research-led service which supports the development of implementation-ready digital health solutions that combine novel software, clinical data, and artificial intelligence. He is also a trained medical doctor holding expertise in assessing and assuring the design quality and safety of patient health technologies, including mental health. Very good. And then we have Professor Jeannie Patterson. Jeannie is a professor of law and the director at the Center of AI and Digital Ethics, a collaborative research and teaching policy center at the University of Melbourne. Her research focuses on consumer protection, product liability, and the regulation of AI. Jeannie is a fellow of the Australian Academy of Law. And finally, we have Dr. Stephanie Allen. So Dr. Allen has 25 years experience working in global healthcare consulting and private equity, spanning both public and private sectors with government and industry. Importantly to this forum, she led a 3-year project with the World Economic Forum on digital mental health, which is the global governance toolkit for digital mental health. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. I have it printed on my desk and I use it quite often, actually. So it's a pleasure to see you in real life. Passionate about health equity, she is also a fellow of Geneva Sustainability Center and the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. Please join me in welcoming the panel and Dr. Peter Baldwin.
Thanks, everybody. Well, Lawrence has promised you drama, so I'll try and provide that. But I'm also a therapist, so I need to make it a little bit weird, if that's all right. I want you to think about a time in your life where you really needed to speak to someone about something that was really difficult. And I want you to imagine coming and seeing this lovely, warm face greeting you. This is your therapist. And your therapist has got some words of encouragement for you as you're going through what is a really, really difficult time for you. So I'll just read out what your therapist is going to say to you. Depression can be incredibly challenging, but it doesn't define who you are. Together, we can work on understanding your thoughts and feelings and find ways of making you feel better. I want you to remember that you have the strength to overcome this. It may take time and there will be ups and downs, but your well-being is worth the effort. I'll be here to guide you, but I'll also be here to challenge you to take small steps towards your recovery. I believe in your ability to make positive changes in your life. You're not alone in this journey, and together we can work towards a brighter future. I'm not sure how any of you would feel if you heard that in a really difficult time in your life, but they're very warm, reassuring words from very warm, reassuring face. But this woman doesn't exist, and those words were written by ChatGPT. So she was created using 14 words in Midjourney, and the prompt for ChatGPT is up there. It was a good exercise for me to learn, and I think I'll have ChatGPT up during my telehealth sessions when things get difficult. So I share Mark's enthusiasm for artificial intelligence in the mental health space. When all my friends were outside playing whatever they were playing, I was inside playing with computers. I've always been attracted to the power of technology to transform people's lives. And as someone who began their research career in neuroscience, I was particularly interested in how computers can actually model the human mind. And I remember one of my undergraduate lecturers saying that most of the problems in mental health won't be solved until computers can actually model the human mind and model the human condition. And interesting, that's what we're starting to see now with machine learning models. They're able to model cognition in a way that we can kind of understand how it works well, and we can understand the times when it doesn't work so well. And I think this can actually transform mental health care. We can move away from our old diagnostic models to the rest of medicine. The DSM looks like a relic. We don't have scarlet fever anymore, and we don't have housemaid's knee. We have diagnoses based on pathology, but then when you come into mental health, we still have things that are described by inventories of symptoms. It's still what it looks like to a doctor rather than what it is in the person. I think AI can transform this. It can transform therapy. We're already seeing natural language processing able to analyze audio recordings of therapy sessions and identify when clients are responding well and when clients aren't responding well, and in real time tweak those therapy sessions for improved clinical outcomes, which I think is really amazing. So there's lots of possibilities, but I think there are lots of things for us to think about really carefully as we go along. There are things like stochastic parrots in generative AI, where the generative AI will start repeating things without actually knowing whether it's true or not. It's just because it learned to do that and it gets reinforced to do that, so it keeps doing it. There are also things like hallucinations, which is probably not a great word, but gives us an idea of what's going on. The AI is kind of filling in the blanks. Where it doesn't know something, it'll make up something that sounds really convincing. And if you pair those two things together, we could end up with digital therapists who really think that they know what they're talking about and not necessarily educated to know the difference, and patients who believe in the authority of the therapist. And so it's probably a dangerous path to go down. There we go. I've always wanted to live in an Edward Hopper painting, and so I asked AI to paint me researching AI and mental health in the style of Edward Hopper, and this is what it came up with, which I think is kind of cool. I was actually looking for AI mental health startups that had a really solid evidence base. I looked at the top 7 that were very well funded, very well respected, and we're talking about a lot of venture capital going in. So there's a lot of market demand for generative AI. Not a single one had quality data behind their claims. They were out treating patients. They have clinical intakes in the thousands per month, but they're not actually able to back anything up with evidence. It's a lot of marketing, not a lot of substance. So we'll be talking about the positives today, but we'll also be talking about the things that we need to really think about carefully when we're introducing AI into mental health. So as before, last poll of the day, get out your phones. You can scan the QR code up here. There's the QR code on your table. And let's start our session with a question about AI. And just think about how likely would you be to recommend an AI-based therapy service to someone who you love who is experiencing depression. So if someone came to you and said that they needed help, how likely is it that you would recommend an AI-based solution for them? This is a slightly more controversial one, which is kind of exciting. Some people are winding back their AI skepticism there. Even further. Interestingly, there at least is 2% of the room that's willing to go there and do it. I think like a lot of us, we need more information, but there's certainly a lot of skepticism. 34% just don't yet feel like that there's a place for it. So I think that's a really good place for us to start our discussion with the panel today. Do I click? So let's start by talking about those pros and cons. we've got a wealth of experience here. So I invite the panel to think about, what are you most excited about for AI and mental health? And what are you most worried or scared about? Stephanie, I might start with you.
So you'll have heard from the introduction that I've been working in the field of digital mental health for probably now, pre-COVID, so probably 10 years. And what I would say is that I do see many, many benefits. So when we were talking today about even accessibility, we all know that actually if you're experiencing an event in your life where you need support, you might not need it at 2 o'clock on a Wednesday when you're seeing your therapist. You might need it at 2 in the morning when you're feeling distraught. And so being able to access services 24/7, I think is a really important part of digital mental health, and also providing access to services to people who wouldn't otherwise be able to access that support. And we've all heard those arguments today. When I think of generative AI, we all leap to the chatbots. And of course, there are many chatbots out there that purport, and some have evidence and some don't, around the support that they can provide to you. Some of the things that we know about chatbots are actually deeply human. So we know that in the sphere of mental health, also sexual health, you are more likely to talk freely and openly about what you are thinking and feeling because you don't feel the human judgment of another individual. You know that when you go into that session, that other individual isn't coming with their own baggage. They haven't had a row with their husband, crashed their car, their son's doing their HSC, whatever it may be, that is distracting them from that therapeutic intervention. Now that sounds like I am saying that generative AI and digital mental health is more superior than face-to-face, and I'm absolutely not. What I'm saying is it is a very important augmented part of the ecosystem. Generative AI can be used for things other than chatbots. So a lot of the work that I've done, I've looked at monitoring devices, being able to track as we speak, tone of voice, listening to as people get more agitated or they feel calm or they're being soothed, looking at rapid eye movement and actually intervening when you can see people moving in and out of different levels of condition. And so generative AI and learning AI can obviously be used in all sorts of different ways, and the monitoring of conditions, I think, is where it sometimes plays its greatest role. I'm somebody that hates the term worried well, because I think our healthcare system should be as much about supporting us to stay well than it is intervening when we're sick or we've been involved in some catastrophic event. So the people who access it that are the worried well, I go for your lives. If that makes you feel better and it supports you to stay and remain well and enhance your well-being, that's fantastic. In terms of generative AI in particular, it's obviously all about data sets. So I think that one of the issues that we've got at the moment is the quality and safety and security of some of those data sets and the validity of them. The classic example, which I'm sure you've all heard, is that when Google first developed their Fitbit, they did it without looking at dark skins. And so it was very good for Western people with white skins. It wasn't so good with dark skins. So that showed that the database that they were using was inequitable. It was looking at particular parts of the population and not looking at all of the population. And then the metrics that came out of the Fitbit were not therefore fit for purpose or clinically efficacious for everybody. And that's the same thing that we need to look for when we're looking at generative AI. What are the databases that we're using? Are they clinically efficacious? Are they fit for purpose for the population that we're trying to serve and the conditions that we're trying to support? And for me, that's one of the challenges, but also the opportunities.
Yeah, equity, I think, is going to be a really interesting topic in this area. Jeannie, your thoughts on what you're excited about and what you might be a bit nervous about?
Well, I'm also, probably like everybody in this panel, excited by technology. That's why I research, work and teach in the field. I'm the director of a centre called the Centre for AI and Digital Ethics, and I guess our catchphrase is demystify AI. And what worries me is the overestimation of the technology that's available to us. With all due respect, we tend to use this very humanistic language to describe generative AI. Generative AI thinks, it hallucinates, gets things wrong. It's actually a pattern prediction tool. It's not thinking, it's not getting it wrong, it's simply predicting patterns to produce an output. And it's really useful in that. But that's as far as it goes. I'd say, with due respect, I think it's a long way from modelling the human brain. Now, we can certainly augment and work with that technology, but I think it's really important that we understand what it's doing. Even the generative bit of generative AI is not that it's keeping on learning, it's that it's creating new content from the database that it's using. In fact, most of the AI or the technology we're using in mental health and the health field at the moment is not generative AI. It's not creating new content. It's actually based on machine learning models that have been built from data sets and from which we've made predictions, which are then used to guide clinical outcomes. So the chatbots we were speaking about, people do like talking to chatbots. Of course, you're absolutely right there. But most of the chatbots we're using at the moment are rule-based chatbots in mental health. So they've actually been trained to using natural language processing to understand the prompt and then been given rules about the types of appropriate answers. And again, they can be really useful too. But I've got a real concern here about the merging of the public and the private, because increasingly what we're doing is seeing university or public-faced institutes taking the learning and the study and reproducing that stuff as a very commercial product. And that commercial product, have a look on your phone, Google Headspace. We have a great mental health provider in Australia called Headspace, but there's also a private provider called Headspace. Looks like this. Sells people a subscription for a well-being or a mindfulness product, and they tell us that that mindfulness product, 14% of people feel better, less stressed after 10 days use. I can tell you that the studies they've used are on a small group of university students who are very similar demographically. So if we're going to talk about equity, then one of the issues is the commercialisation of data and learning about mental health leads to poor outcomes for everybody who isn't in that 14% in that narrow demographic. And moreover, I know privacy may not be a preferred... Sorry, I'll start again. We should share data for better mental health outcomes. But what this commercialisation of these products, this overhyping of the potential of AI does is take consumer data and make it available to companies for advertising, your employer for monitoring individual wellbeing in the workplace, and potentially the employer's insurer to decide how insurance is priced. Now, I don't think those are great outcomes for everyone. So let's just, demystify and de-hype, and then we can do a really good job with this technology.
Yeah, very important. Yeah, don't get me started on the quality of research that's being used to hype up these tools. I think we all do agree on that, and I think, Kit, you probably even do some work in this space. So I won't ask you what a validitron is, but what are your concerns as the head of the validitron?
Thanks, Peter. Spoilers, we sort of pre-prepared this question in advance, and it took me quite a long time to think about what I thought the big opportunities and risks were, and I think particularly on the opportunity side, that's an answer in itself. And I think my answers about opportunity are probably going to seem rather oblique, and I think that's a kind of answer in itself. I think one area where AI is really forging ahead in medicine more generally is in radiology, and I appreciate that's only peripherally relevant to this audience, perhaps at the neuropsychiatry end. But I think there are key lessons in that around the embedding of that particular technology with existing technology, imaging technology, the success in fairly simple machine learning algorithms in doing things like segmenting images so they can be analysed, but a really clear intersection between that capability and problems that the workforce understand and face. The ever-growing volume of imaging, the constrained radiology workforce, and a technology-enabled workforce that was ready for it. And I think that's relevant for us today, probably not so much because we can borrow from it, but understanding perhaps why our context is different and what we need to do instead. In terms of other opportunities, I mean, I think we're going to talk a lot about large language models and generative AI a lot. Again, an oblique answer. I think the biggest immediate opportunities around large language models and generative AI right now are around enabling productivity in workflows that we benefit from. And particularly, many of us here are involved in, for example, in digital mental health app and intervention development. Software development teams leveraging AI to get code built faster to a higher quality, tick off some of those QMS concerns around building high quality software by finally getting unit tests built reliably. That will be a solved problem. It's almost already a solved problem. And so for us, discharging public money to get these things built, those are things we need to be across and to make happen. I think on the flip side, Jeannie's really already talked about, I think, one of the most significant concerns around this technology, which is the massive gulf, probably the unprecedented gulf between public discourse on the fundamental nature of this technology and its underlying technical reality in terms of what it actually is and what it's actually doing. It is not a thinking machine. It is an algorithm making word by word or token by token predictions based on previous inputs in the same sequence when we talk about things like decoder-based LLMs. And I think we have to recognize that it is in the interest of the companies, in terms of public discourse and marketing, it's in their interest to promote this kind of language, but it's also in their interest to do it because it shifts responsibility away from them to deal with the technical problems that they've created. We wouldn't say that our toaster, when it burns the toast, is a bad toaster, except in the most informal sense. And yet we have discourse around chatbots saying they are racist in a way that attributes agency to them, when really it's a failure of engineering. And that has to be owned and understood, not in isolation perhaps by the tech folk, but it has to be owned at some point upstream in the development cycle. I think the other thing, just before I finish, is just this is also the first technology that's come around where it is almost fully commodified, as in it is a commodity at the point it entered the marketplace. It is accessible to huge swathes of the population in easy to access forms. It came with API layers. We work in a space where you have lots of small independent developers trying to get ahead. Startup culture incentivizes that kind of, let's hustle and let's put these things in. And I think that creates a unique context for risk, which is probably really concentrated in mental health, given that we have a successful track record of true interventions, or at least a building evidence base around true interventions in a way you don't see elsewhere in digital health.
And I'll just add, and the mental health market, and somebody mentioned this earlier, is under-regulated. You don't have to get TGA approval to bring most of these products to market.
It is extraordinary. You can obviously tell why we got along when we first met up. There's lots of sort of shared values. I think one thing that I'm hearing is it's really important how we talk about AI in mental health, even down to the language that we use. I think it's really disappointing that the term hallucination has developed around particular types of results that are returned by generative AI. It's stigma already built in before the tool's already even been applied. How should we be talking about AI specifically in the context of mental health? What language do you think we should be using? Do any of you have any ideas around if we were to describe a generative AI tool to a patient, a consumer, a policymaker? How would we describe generative AI or a generative AI therapist? Are they delivering therapy? Is it thoughtful therapy? What would you say?
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to go back to something I said earlier. So I do think that generative AI does have a place within the mental health suite of tools. Some of the things that are really important in that space is the micro-personalization that can take place. So we spoke earlier today about the way that some of these tools are being developed at the moment, and it may be because of their commercial value, and I'll come to that in a second, is that it's a cookie cutter approach and it's one size fits all, because what you want to do is to sell that particular thing multiple times and get that multiple subscriptions. And what generative AI can do is become quite micro-personalized very cheaply and very fast. And so, I was working with a group of young people in China, and we had this very, very poor understanding of what they actually wanted in terms of the interaction between them and a generative AI chatbot. And so we were like, they're going to embrace this, they're going to think this is fantastic, etc. When we actually did the research, they didn't want to see a human face on the other side of this chatbot. And so we ended up designing a kaleidoscope. So as you spoke to the screen, the kaleidoscope colours moved, and you could see that essentially information was being shared. And when the chatbot spoke back to you, again, it was a kaleidoscope that you could see moving and forming, but it didn't have a kind of a humanoid face. And they really felt, or for a particular group that we were focusing on with a particular condition, in a particular culture, with a particular language, that really worked for them. And so some of the generative AI capability for me is that micro-personalization that I think is really good. I have to say that, so I share a lot of the concerns, and you'll see if you do look at the paper that we ended up sharing a lot of the concerns that have been expressed on the panel around shonky AI tools for mental health that have not got clinical efficacy, haven't got data and privacy support and protection, that don't get reviewed, et cetera, and 5 minutes in, they're trying to sell dementia patients cod liver oil tablets, etc. But I have to say that I also think that the partnership between the private sector and the startup community is really important for the innovation. And it needs to be done in a very careful way, in a very deliberate way, and with guardrails. But there is no way that government can fund and develop and scale the sort of mental health support and technologies that we really need. And so it is a partnership within guardrails, but I still think that the private sector and the innovation community and the ethical community, my friend sitting next to me, has a really important part to play in navigating this road forward.
I mean, to sort of return to the original question a little bit, I think it's worth unpacking what are you trying to get to by that kind of act of framing up this tool and trying to describe it. And I think there are probably, please, maybe it's a point for discussion, there are probably several motivations. One is to help people understand what this is that they're being asked to do, just in an informal sense. There is what its limitations might be, which is very germane to the things we've been talking about, and maybe in the context of agent-like technical artifacts, there might be some concern or some desire for people to invest emotionally into it that you might want to manage through that communication. And I suspect the last perhaps is the most fraught in terms of then representing its limitations, or at least there's the potential for complexity there. I think that having plain language ways to describe the limitations of LLM is quite hard right now, because at a very deep technical sense, we are not necessarily able to articulate how those limitations manifest in particular use cases. And so it's not really an answer, but I think as I guess research-led effort and also engineering-led efforts proceed in this area, and we start to unpack when and why these things fail, that will provide a basis for giving people good information about the thing they're about to sign up for.
Yeah, really important.
And I guess I would just add to both of those comments. I think we all agree there is a role for this technology somewhere, and it's understanding it. I still think we tend to overestimate the role. But I guess I'm going to now move to the ethical perspective, because we've had the technical and we've had the probably social. Yeah, so I'm going to go to the ethical a little bit. So one of the biggest sort of suggestions for use for AI companions, for want of a better word, is for elderly people who may be lonely. So we've seen companion robots being increasingly debated. And then for lonely people, there's actually quite a lot of products out there that will provide an AI companion to people who are perhaps lonely or don't have a fulfilling relationship. And then we've got a variety of tools available for either tracking your mental health or mindfulness practices, or even cognitive behavioural therapy, or like an AI counsellor. And I guess all of those applications, all of those we can't say any of those are wrong, but I think we need to think about the sort of innate humanity of the relationships we're building. So I don't think loneliness is solved by having an artificial companion. That's my personal view. But they're questions we need to ask. So we don't just need to ask, does it work? Is it safe? But also, is this a society that we want to have where we solve problems of loneliness and relationship with an artificial agent that will only ever mimic what it is to be human. So I think that we need to keep those questions front and foremost, as well as the questions about, does it work? How well does it work? Is it like a human? What's the right partnership to have?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. I went a bit off script there. I didn't sort of tell the panel that I was going to ask that question. And part of it was because I wanted to see and introduce this idea that this is a really complex thing, even for people who talk about this each and every day. These are really complex issues, and we're not as far down the track as we are with a lot of other things. So there won't always be perfect answers to the questions. Even computer scientists don't have words to describe the way generative AI operates or the outcomes of generative AI models without using cognitive type language. So these are all really, really complex issues that we won't solve here today. But thank you so much, each of you, for sort of discussing it from your unique points of view. There's lots of really interesting questions coming through from the audience. And it's really hard to pick one, but I think given that we're here today in Canberra and we're here today talking about policy, one of the questions is, should government be leading the way in developing evidence-based generative AI digital solutions, or is it something that we should leave to the startups and the corporate world? It's definitely, you look like you've got lots of thoughts, I'm sure you do.
Yes. So no, I don't think government should be developing that. I think they should be setting the guardrails. So there is, if we, government can't do everything. It can't fund everything. It hasn't got the skills for everything. And so in my view, partnerships and ecosystems are always the way to go. So you do what you do really, really well, what you're really good at. And in my view, government needs to have surety that it can fund the right sort of generative AI and put guardrails around it that protects clinicians that are prescribing it, users that are going to use it, and has some kind of feedback loop that's around improvement, because we're not going to get this right. Unlike lots of policy decisions, this simply cannot be a set and forget, because the generative AI market, the way that we think about it, the way we deploy it into our lives is moving so rapidly and so quickly. Who would have thought that we'd be talking about ChatGPT even 5 years ago? And so it's a very, very flexible policy framework that's required, and that is, I think, is the role of government. So government needs to set those guardrails so that the innovative companies, the PE firms that want to invest in it, whatever, know that that will be the sort of generative AI that will be quality assured, encouraged by clinicians to use, encouraged by consumers, and they will then work within that sandpit. So I feel quite strongly that government should not be in the business of building generative AI for health.
Okay, so you wanted controversy. So I think government should be in control, and the reason is that we don't know what the guardrails look like at this point of time. Actually, it's not really government starting from scratch, and you'll talk about this more, but what's happening in the law profession is that ChatGPT is very US-based because it's been trained on data off the internet. So what law firms are doing is taking the underlying model that was what's called a foundational model, which is the ability to make very good predictions about language, and then refining that on Australian law. Now, I think Australian data, Australian circumstances should, I think governments and universities, trusted providers, should be the ones who are making use of that valuable resource. That doesn't mean starting from scratch, so that's probably where we overlap. But of course government and universities should have the expertise, because if we don't have the expertise, how do we ever hope to regulate it? So I'm with, come on, government and universities, we do it ourselves. I would also say that for certain groups, certain minority groups, we can look to New Zealand. People don't necessarily want their data combined in large data sets because they would like to have exercise sovereignty over the data of their people. And I think that's something we need to be very aware of as well.
I shall be, shall I walk the line between the two, unhelpfully? Yeah, okay. I mean, government has a noble track record of getting digital health very, very wrong. I come from a country which spent £11 billion on a national programme for IT that delivered an email service. So, but I think, you know, that was a decade ago, more than a decade ago now, and I think, you know, lessons about what the proper functioning or opportunities for government in this space have moved on as software has moved on, and so I think, you know, current focus around enabling interop, mandating standards, allowing the private sector to actually do the doing of the glue. You know, philosophically, there have been advances which I think are right, and in relation to this, things like data standardization to enable model training are really positive and should be encouraged and continue. I think there's a but, though, which is, and it returns to one of my earlier points, which is about the cap sort of being firmly out the bag around access to GPT. So in the UK, we know that 350,000 NHS email addresses are registered with OpenAI. So clearly most people are not using it for unsafe uses, but a certain proportion of people certainly are. And we work in a space where we have a large number of private providers managing large caseloads, where the incentives, for example, to use LLM summarization to generate letters, etc., probably are quite high. So my view is we're firmly into some sort of, to bastardize public health concepts, harm minimization scenario. So I actually think the idea of a national clinical LLM built with Australian data, where the insights are not going back to an American company who will presumably monetize this at some point in the future to build mental health services, is something we should at least take very seriously and create a safe space for us to progress the science, because we have great digital health science in Australia, but also provide assurance to minimize some of the major information governance risks we know are happening around the use of OpenAI. If you use OpenAI through its web interface as a user, you agree for them to reuse anything you put in for their training and other purposes, and that's not acceptable from a clinical point of view.
There's also the point, actually, that the more people are using, I think, ChatGPT to ask questions about particular issues, the less accurate it's becoming, because it's, to the extent that it's generative, it's the sort of, the dross rises to the top. So again, that the need for refining, I think, is really, would you think, important?
There's sort of anecdotal evidence of that happening in real time for good and for bad. Yeah. So for example, people correcting information about crisis lines that independent users on other computers then get the correct number in their next query, which is great. But I think the challenge, again, from perhaps the sort of the more general technical challenge is we just don't know what the commercial providers' strategies are for optimization. And so lacking that insight, we have the sort of classic black box problem of kind of, you know, the quality surface area is therefore effectively unknown.
That's your sandbox.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very complex area, that's for sure. We've only got about 4 minutes left on this topic. It's gone really quickly. I was curious if there was a question from the audience that anyone was burning to ask.
Oh. Sorry.
Thank you. I guess a great discussion so far, and I agree with most, if not everything, for what we said. One thing I think with the radiology sector, because I was part of that journey when I worked at the College of Radiologists for Radiology and Radiation Oncology, but there was a lot of fear and hope around the prospects of AI, and they were dealing with the fear of replacement as well of human beings in delivering radiology services. But the radiology sector, one thing it did very, very well was to set expectations around what was acceptable to be done in a radiology context. So it brings it back to ethical point around just because the technology can do something doesn't mean it should be doing something. Would you have any advice around how the, I guess, mental health sector might be able to set some of those expectations around how the technology might be used in clinical settings?
We all want to go first. I would just say, actually, the radiology sector has been really interesting. So Jeff Hinton, who you may have heard about, has recently been on the air predicting that, you know, the future of AI is apocalyptic. It's going to destroy us. Jeff Hinton was the person who 10 years ago said you wouldn't need radiologists because AI was going to be so good, and that is not the case. AI in radiology is really good, but what it's done is it's a really good model because so there was a recent study published in Nature about breast cancer diagnosis and saying AI plus a radiologist is as good as 2 radiologists, which is the gold standard. And I think that's where we want to go, right? To make better use of resources and let people do their jobs more efficiently. So I guess that would be my comment. Look to that. It comes back to that collaborative model, doesn't it? A collaborative, but I say sceptical model.
Absolutely. Kit, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I mean, find the collaborative opportunities. I think we have a problem, actually, though, which is not going to answer your question with apologies, but I think it's related, which is, you know, the pace of change of technology and its increasing sophistication opens a question as to where in the clinical space, be it in clinical governance, be it in amongst clinicians, be it amongst developers, should responsibility sit for deeply understanding this technology to the point that we can have these sort of deep quality related discussions. And I don't think we've cracked that. And so it's really exciting to hear about initiatives to upskill developers and asking the right questions and appreciating perhaps where clinicians are coming from. But I have to say, I'm not sure that's enough. For some reason, we are turning out computer science graduates who perhaps, you know, end up not valuing in the same way that we perhaps as clinicians might, you know, value the fundamental safety or rights or aspirations of what we're trying to achieve with clinical care. And I think that's a missed opportunity because you know, as much as we, you know, as much as there is innovation in the academic sector, and a lot of the foundational work, of course, de facto happens in the academic sector, a lot of the stuff that's actually used starts in the sort of peripheral startup sector, which is only loosely connected and where quality is always a relative concern amongst other things like surviving as a business. And so I feel like we have to change the way people are entering the job market, thinking about what it means to develop for clinical solutions, I think. And I don't have a great answer as to how we do that. I feel like it probably needs to start in some way at universities in our training, but we're not doing it yet.
Yeah,
that's what I can say.
There's a mindset question there in that training piece. Stephanie, last comment.
And I think just to round us up, so when I look at the progression of medicine over the last 50 years, it has obviously got much, much more complex. We've, gone down particular organ routes. We have fragmented the human body. So we've got orthopedic surgeons and respiratory physicians and whatever else it is. And the link between our physical health and our mental health is so important. And we're learning every day that things like the microbiome, which we always said was impacted by our mental well-being, actually contributes to our mental well-being. So it is this continuous circle. And I look at medicine and I look at all the, frontiers of genomics and genetic engineering. And I also remember the sad statistic and how long it takes from, to get from the research bench to the bed in terms of changing care. And that's where I think generative AI and digital technology can really come into this. It's about supporting clinicians to hold all of the information that they have to have about different body parts and bring it together in a holistic way to treat the whole person, which we've spoken about. It's about concertinaing that time frame from research bench to bed so that you and I, if I've got a cancer tumor, can get the best diagnosis and the best treatment that is available and not have to wait until somebody adopts it within my particular geography, within my particular medical fraternity, and then I have to afford to pay for it. So for me, it's those things where generative AI and digital technology can actually play an enormous positive role in the way that medicine is practiced today.
Absolutely. Lots of risks and lots of opportunities, I think. Stephanie Allen, Jenny Patterson and Kit Huttvale, I think you're the experts the policymakers in Canberra need. Thank you so much for joining us today.